nation where we are putting death out of business. It's going to be a really good one because it's a continuation of what Chad Wilson's been talking about with the Green Party scandal, the crisis that's going on in the Green Party primary. It's Mr. Ian Schlakman here from the United States. I'm not sure which part of the United States, but you can inform us on that. It's a big thing going on there in the Green Party. There's, it's a big party. I mean, it's not a small party we're talking about. I'm used to talking about the U.S. transhumanist-party and the longevity party and some of these other parties, but the Green Party is a well-established big party, and it's having some interesting problems. And so, as USTP, as we run up, because we want to become a bigger party, as we become better, we want to avoid some of these problems, and so we're here to learn from you guys, learn what you're hitting hitting issues and hitting problems. So let's talk about it, Mr. Schlakman. Firstly, welcome to Dead Nation, and tell people about who you are, how you got into the Green Party in particular, what's your background, what's your philosophy, anything else you want to tell us about, your background and who you are.
Yeah, sure. I really appreciate you having me on. I'm actually kind of a fan of the Transhumanist-Party, so I'm happy to be here. Cool. I'm Ian Schlakman. I was a Green Party candidate for president. I am currently boycotting the National Green Party because I feel that they are running a very poorly run primary, and we've complained to several different parts of the Green Party National, and our complaints have not really been heard. And, I'm one of the 5 candidates that signed on to this joint letter. That was not the first joint letter that we signed on to as candidates. That was the 3rd joint letter that I've signed on to. Before that, 6 out of 7 candidates, and before that, another 6 out of 7 candidates also signed 2 previous joint letters, basically complaining about some very heavy-handed tactics there's really no other way to say it than to rig the presidential primary for another candidate whose name is Howie Hawkins. There's really no other way for me to phrase it or say it at this point. I can't sugarcoat it any longer. That is truly what's going on here. We've proven over and over again that the Hawkins team has been invited to come out to certain events that other party candidates are not invited to come out to. Not only that, sometimes he's actually paid by state parties, or his team's paid by the national party to actually arrive at certain events. And that's totally insane, and we've been complaining about it over and over again. These complaints have spilled over into very public forums. The complaints spilled over to a Black Caucus that we had here in the U.S., and then they spilled over to the annual national meeting, which was our first national debate, we've been sounding the alarm with Greens that are concerned about this, but so far this hasn't really been rectified at all. And it's a real shame, too, because my platform is I'm a revolutionary socialist. I could talk a little bit about that, and it's one less voice, one less idea that won't be in the primary now because of this.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. And Howie Hawkins, is that I'm just trying to recall, is that the gentleman who he's actually a member of another party as well?
Yeah, he is. So a little into the race, he announced that not only is he a member of another party, a pretty old party called the Socialist Party USA, but he also then decided that he was going to run for the nomination of the Socialist Party USA. And the Socialist Party USA is one of the more moderate socialist parties in this country. Juxtapose that to, it's like a Bernie Sanders style socialism. If you juxtapose that to like a revolutionary style socialist, which I am, and I could talk a little bit more about the differences for your audience if you'd like. But, that was a big shock to all of us. And then recently he actually won that nomination. And what's sort of interesting about this is there was a young man that tried to run with the Green Party whose name is Elijah Manley. And he was very young, in his 20s, I believe. And, he said, I want to run. The Green Party's not really going to win anyway. I'm not of the legal age to become president, but it shouldn't really matter. The Green Party's more about symbolism, and I'm a millennial, and I should be able to run. Well, the party sort of rejected his run, so he went over to run for the Socialist Party USA. And hilariously and sort of ironically, then Howie Hawkins at the last minute decides he's going to run for that same nomination and gets it. So it's sort of like as folks are trying to find other outlets to run and express themselves, for some reason Mr. Hawkins somehow gets himself right in there and has to, be the only candidate of the third party candidates that are out there. It's insane.
Wow, that is insane. And did they have these problems last time with Jill Stein? Because like were you a part of that whole charade last time when Jill Stein went through? Because I wasn't exactly looking into the primaries of that process back then. So is this unique? Do they always have problems in their primary, or is this exceptional?
Yeah, a lot of us, I think, were surprised by what's going on with the Green Party right now. But I'll tell you who wasn't surprised, and it's someone else that I recommend you have on sometime. And her name is I'm going to mispronounce her name, but I'm going to try my best. Sidanam Mufaza Curry. She is a fiery socialist green from California, who sort of told all the candidates ahead of time, the way that the Green Party ran the primary process in 2016, where she ran, I believe, against Jill herself and against, no, I think it was her and Jill. I'm not sure if there were there were a couple other candidates, but I don't think they were very interested in actually getting the nomination. She kind of warned us that the way the primary process is in the Green Party is a bit broken, and it's not really taken very seriously. So, she had a very interesting idea to run together as a slate of candidates to get the Green Party vision out. We're 7 candidates total. So if you have 7 candidates on the ground touring the country, that's a lot more effective and powerful than just one candidate touring the country. Only one person can only be in so many places at one time. But 7 candidates dividing up their time and energy, literally touring the country representing the Green Party, would be 7 times more powerful. So, we've been repeatedly saying, and I wish some of us would have listened to her sooner, myself included, that why can't the Green Party run 7 candidates? Why can't we have 7 candidates on the ballot? Why are we making our candidates jump through certain hoops when it goes against our values? One of my things is that I don't want to see the Green Party spend a ridiculous amount of money or time on the presidential ticket. I want them to focus on down-ticket candidates that could actually win elections. And I want us to celebrate those down-ticket candidates as they get elected. I don't understand why the Green Party has a requirement to raise a certain amount of money. To me, that seems sort of hypocritical to green values. And also, it genuinely undercuts my message, which is that we should be spending our money on down-ticket candidates that can actually win, not a presidential race.
Interesting. Yeah, we had three in the USTP primary to start with, and that exploded to 9. I know that, and that was really good because we got a huge diversity of views. The USTP is a non-monetary organization, and basically they endorse the presidential winner of the primary. So that keeps them that step out. That keeps them out, and that's really exciting because then they have that 1 degree of difference, which means that they can also be international because for unlike the Green Party, for example, or the Socialist Party or the Republican Party or the Democrat Party or whoever, the Libertarian Party, we have members from all around the world who can sign up and influence the USTP, which is really exciting. So we get ideas and innovations from all around the world, and from all sides of the political spectrum as well. Who would be interesting to talk to about this Green Party primary would be Abby Martin. I think Abby Martin would love this.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, actually, it's funny. I actually went up to New York City and saw her new production of Gaza Fights for Freedom. It's very interesting because I think that there are a lot of folks that are anti-imperialist, anti sort of the American and the capitalist empire, who Abby really speaks to with her documentary series, her new movie, and some of the work that she's done. I don't think that the Green Party frontrunner, Mr. Hawkins, really speaks to that at all, to be frank with you. We're losing a lot of diversity by just kicking off candidates like this, and I really don't see the point. But what's interesting is I've actually used the transhumanist party as sort of a learning tool when I talk to other news outlets about this, because you all seem to have really done it right. I mean, you gave very, very clear deadlines for folks as to when they had to register to be able to vote as a transhumanist member. And that, to me, makes a lot of sense. And one of the things that I've been arguing with the Green Party about till I've been blue in the face is that the Green Party National is not really doing all it can to assure that every single person who's a registered Green, or wants to vote Green, rather, can actually vote. You see, in my opinion, we should be encouraging every single person to vote who wants to take their time to learn about a Green nominee and put their, and actually fill out a voter card and do so. But instead, the Green Party has been making all these various hurdles, such as getting various amounts of signatures on a form that's totally unverifiable, and then also taking the signature requirement and then that monetary requirement and then relaying it to the states. So now each state is sort of emulating what the Democrats do, which is, they could have the option to kick certain folks off the ballot in each state. So it's really anti-democratic, and there should just be a very simple process that says every single person who wants to vote in our Green Party primary should be able to. That should be what our steering committee should be working on, and instead they're kicking folks off the ballot.
Yeah, because it works as kind of a federalist system, right? It's kind of like a federation where each state is independent of the national, right?
That's exactly right. And what's annoying is that the U.S. system was designed like that. In the U.S., the states have all the power in terms of who they allow to vote and when they allow to vote and all this different kinds of stuff. That's why you have different primary dates for every single leg of the race in the Democratic and Republican primary. But I feel like, the Transhumanist Party kind of said, well, we're going to ignore this, or we're not going to follow a bad system. We're going to make sure everyone that wants to vote can register and vote as long as they fill in, that they intend to vote by the deadline. That's a much better system. The National Party, by creating these requirements for signatures and for money, is actually opening the floodgates for corrupt state officials to say, okay, well, let me check here now. So we've got a couple different candidates that say one of them has 200 signatures, that's Mr. Hawkins. Another one has 190 signatures, that might be Mr. Hunter, another candidate. And then the rest of them have maybe 90 or 80. Okay, so we're going to make our official primary ballot only accessible to people that have filled out 200 signatures or above. And guess what? That only means one candidate's on the ballot, literally Mr. Hawkins. And so this is the kind of BS. I mean, this is like Democratic primary stuff run amok. I mean, the Democrats are barring candidates from getting on the election stage. That's one thing. But the Green Party has taken it to a new extreme, where they're literally saying you can't be on the ballot unless you raise money and get signatures. And by the way, it's a black box signature system where you can't even verify the signatures. We're just going to tell you how many you get. My signature total has been at the exact same amount for months. I have people that are literally telling me, I put in a signature for you, I get nothing out of the system. And I'm saying, you know what, this is just ridiculous. We could do better than this.
Yeah, there needs to be a feedback loop so that people feel like they participated in something, that they get, like in the USCP, for example, we have a ranked preference system, which is interesting, which means everybody's vote counts, and you don't have to vote for the lesser evil, like when you head up to, Trump versus Hillary or whatever, or you actually vote on who you think is the best in the order that you think is the best, with none of the above in there somewhere, wherever you want. So, even in that way, I think it's more efficient. It's the only problem that we struggle with here at the USTP is the fact that, it's just hard to get an international audience, an international coalition of members to sometimes turn out on voting day or on the voting week, because it's hard to get emails open and it's hard to communicate the message, and sometimes people don't look at Facebook or they don't look at the whatever, and it's just sometimes the communication method is a little bit hard on an international stage, but otherwise, it's ranked preference.
Well, what's very strange is the Green Party is all about an open democratic voting system. Jill Stein is actually in the middle of a lawsuit in Pennsylvania right now where she's trying to make sure the code for the voting systems is completely open source and accessible to the public and verifiable. So there's a way to verify the votes. But meanwhile, the steering committee, the presidential campaign support committee for the Green Party, who made this signature form, doesn't even have a verifiable system. They're using a Google form, and they're not even telling us, to see the back. They're not even really allowing anyone to see the back end, except for folks on the committee. So I mean, it's a black box. We say we don't like. We do usually use ranked choice voting ourselves in the Green Party. However, and this is what gets really weird, there's not really a requirement for the states to use it. There's not even a requirement for the states to have the candidates on the ballot. So a state could technically say, well, we're going to just choose the candidate ahead of time, or we're going to have a primary with only 2 candidates on it, or we're going to have a primary ballot with only a couple candidates that we like that have filed in a certain way. It's been incredibly bizarre, and we've been asking states over and over again, can you please make this more transparent? Because what my campaign has done is we brought a lot of folks into the Green Party that have actually said, I like anti-imperialist viewpoints like yours. I like Abby Martin. I like that whole, socialist revolutionary thing that you're doing. How can I vote for you? And my response has to be, I'll get back to you or talk to your state. Maybe you can, maybe you can't, because the states are so frazzled with this election process. A lot of them are using a caucus system, which basically means if you don't actually physically show up to the election site on the day of, and then stand in a certain center, like a caucus is kind of a common practice in the U.S. It's what the Iowa folks will be doing for the Democratic primary too. But it's really bizarre, and it really disenfranchises folks that can't literally drive out and spend a night caucusing and then drive up to the next vote and keep on caucusing. So, the system is just all kinds of messed up, and I feel like rather than improve upon it or do what you all are doing and trying to make it as clear as possible with almost like an open primary system. Register this way by this date and you will be able to vote. Just check your email. I mean, we're doing the exact opposite. We're saying, well, talk to your local people and maybe if they like the folks that you like, they'll let them on the ballot. Don't hold your breath. And maybe if you're not registered green, but like one of the problems is that in my state of Maryland, you have to be a dues paying member of the Green Party to be considered a Green Party member, literally paying dues. Now, in other states, you just have to be a registered Green, not dues paying, just registered on your voter card. So we've asked, over and over again, the President's Campaign Support Committee, does that mean they can be registered or a member? And we don't really get a response. They just don't really seem very interested in answering our questions. And, I just feel like it would be wrong of me to stay in the primary process when I'm seeing this many issues. I can't tell folks to vote in a rigged primary process or one that's just this obfuscated and unclear. It's just ridiculous.
It'd be good to hear. It'd be also good to see you get onto Democracy Now! I think these guys would like to hear this sort of revelations from within the Green Party, because those guys are definitely on board with a fair, balanced political process, and they have a large audience, large reach. Talk about your. Sorry, what?
No, go ahead.
Talk about your campaign. So obviously you've come in, you've tried to get on the ballot. You've run a campaign. You've brought in anti-imperialist people. What have you done to what's your message that you want to tell people, and what have you done to support the Greens, and what were you trying to tell them, and what were you trying to achieve, etc.?
Sure, and I'll just let me just jump back to something you said a minute ago, because Democracy Now! Has not really covered much Green Party stuff, but comedian Jimmy Dore has covered it quite a lot.
Yeah, he's huge.
Recently it's not just folks that are annoyed with the Hawkins folks for going along, or rather, I should say, literally requesting this Green Party primary rigging. If you see what some of the Hawkins folks have wrote to me, you'll kind of see exactly what I'm talking about. They've been implanting themselves in high-ranking committees like the Media Committee, literally to try to push Greens that are more neutral into pushing their sole candidate, Howie Hawkins. to get the front and center spotlight when other folks are just not getting any attention from the party. It's been crazy. But other folks like Jimmy Dore has said, that Howie Hawkins, I think he called him like morally impaired, because other folks that I've reached to when I go up to like Michigan, for example, have said they've worked with Hawkins up there, and they literally called him a snake. I mean, I don't know what it is about this guy. I don't really know Hawkins very well myself. I think I maybe had one conversation with him. He sounded incredibly moderate. His politics are very similar to those of like Bernie Sanders. But every single person I ask about how was your experience working with him, has told me nothing but negative stuff. And I don't know what else we could do at this point. I think it was at first folks saying, oh, it's just these 5 complainers, so let's ignore them. So we've written, 3 joint letters total. And now I think some of the more Green Party press, people that actually do cover us like Jimmy Dore are finally speaking up and saying, hey, this isn't urgent. He literally said, I think that Howie Hawkins' nomination would be the death of the Green Party. I don't know what else I could do to tell folks who are Greens, who are high ranking, that this is a problem. You don't want to believe me? You don't want to believe Jimmy Dore? I don't know what to tell you. Not only that, but Hawkins' campaign manager literally wrote, this is not a joke, she actually said this, that if Governor Jesse Ventura, a governor, mind you, I don't like Jesse Ventura's politics, but, he's certainly someone that should be welcomed into the Green Party and allowed to run. But she literally wrote in a public forum, if Jesse Ventura runs, I will beat him up. Like, that's literally something that she wrote. And when asked about it, she said, yeah, that's right, because one of us is going to go out in a body bag or something stupid like that.
Whoa.
Like, what kind of, that's so immature, so ridiculous, so juvenile. I mean, you can sit here all day and say that folks like me and Chad and Sydenham are the problem, or David, and in reality, this is just, this is, you cannot ignore the amount of people that have spoken up and said that this is crazy. I mean, so as simple as that. I mean, I'll give you one more example if I could, because this is just so crazy. Another example is at a Florida debate, Hawkins's campaign manager, Miss Andrea, actually came in person, and at this point in time, she's a Green Party co-chair. So she literally said, hi, I'm Andre. I'm going to mispronounce her name. I always do, and I apologize for that. I'm Andrea Merida, and I'm here as 2 hats today. And one is I am co-chair of the Green Party, national co-chair of the Green Party, and the other one is I am Howie Hawkins' campaign manager. Now, if Tom Perez, the head of the DNC, walked onto the debate stage and said, hi, I'm here today as the chair of the DNC. I'm going to have a really fair debate, but I'm also here to tell you I'm Joe Biden's campaign manager. People would literally boo him off the stage. Like, Democrats would not tolerate that. I have no idea why we think this is acceptable behavior. And since I've announced my boycott, I've been getting attacked by another Green Party co-chair, also who literally founded the Draft Howie Hawkins committee. And I'm just, I mean,
it sounds like a selection, not an election. What do you reckon?
It sounds like a madhouse, because that's kind of what it is. I mean, we think people should be smarter than this.
Yeah, so the message, Chad talked a bit about the message, Jesse Ventura thing as well, and it shocked me because I'm not exactly up to date with the Green Party politics, but yeah, I could, because he was on Alex Jones, he was a right wing, sort of conspiracy theorist guy, kind of Texas or whatever, or Arizona or whatever he was, and then I heard, well, but he said he said he came over because he believes in climate change, yeah.
That's basically what he said. He said he's done with the Libertarian Party specifically because he doesn't feel they're strong enough on climate change. And he said publicly that his goal is to get Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to run with him in a ticket. Is a Robert F. Kennedy Jr. be his running mate, and he would be the presidential candidate. And that would really blow the other candidates out of the water. So, I mean, I really have no earthly idea why you would threaten to fight this man. I mean, if you don't like, he's sort of anti-vax, I'm pro-vaccine. Like, I think there's a lot of ways to fight him that are, on the level. But, he's not rigging the primary as far as I can tell. It's the Hawkins folks that are rigging the primary. And they've sort of just disrupted the narrative that we would be giving out as Greens. Like, we should be having a robust debate around the Green New Deal. We should be having robust information, about what's going on in Syria or what's going on in Venezuela. And instead, we're dealing with this nonsense.
What's the history of the Hawkins people? I mean, is it a Trump infiltration scheme where they've thrown him in there at the last minute? Is he someone unknown, or has he got a long history with the party?
No, this is where it gets really bizarre. So Hawkins has a very long history with the party. He was there at the founding of the party.
Right, here we go.
So I do want to give credit where credit is due. He was one of the first, but not the first person, I believe, to run on a Green New Deal before Jill really championed it, and then later on AOC, Congresswoman AOC here in the U.S. He is. He's more of a moderate Green. He's more of a socialist, but he's sort of like a Bernie Sanders style socialist. We recall a reform socialist. And some of the biggest differences between him and what I would call a revolutionary socialist would be his sort of international stances. I don't think he likes a lot of hardline regimes, I think he'd call them. I think he's used the word Assad apologist for a lot of us that don't want to see the U.S. in Syria. I think he's called the Venezuelan government like a corrupt bureaucratic nightmare, that Chavez or Maduro could have rectified and didn't. So he doesn't really support them either. So it's a very different kind of politics because, I do support the Venezuelan government. I'm certainly against the U.S. intervening. I'm certainly I'm definitely against Guaido, obviously. Obviously I support the troop pullout in Syria as well. I think that Abby Martin did a wonderful job explaining that back in January, and I've sort of updated some of the things that she's talked about to make it a little more modern for these times, because I think Trump is a salesman, and I think he wants to sell weapon systems to Turkey, and that's way more of interest to him than actually keeping troops or a no-fly zone in Syria. But on top of that, I don't want intervention in Syria. I want to curtail the U.S. empire whenever possible, because the U.S. empire is how we literally breed and bring about capitalism and colonialism. And my campaign is, was, anti-capitalist, anti-colonialist, anti-imperialist, and pro-socialist. So, that we were very, very clear about that whenever I would speak publicly about my campaign. And what's really bizarre is that, and this is what really makes me mad, to be frank with you, is that the folks that a lot of the folks that were on the Draft Howie Hawkins committee were founded that committee. You can kind of look up who they are. I mean, a lot of those folks are folks that defended Venezuela and were literally in the embassy fighting for that, for the U.S. to not take it over and hand it over to Guaido. A lot of them are who we would call anti-imperialist, but they don't seem to care or to ever question any of Hawkins' policies that are basically pro-imperialist. And so the agenda here seems to be to just take over the Green Party. I mean, the agenda here just seems to be
after like listening to Chad and listening to you now, that's what I've kind of got is that he feels entitled because of his just longevity with the movement, and he just sort of feels like now he's entitled to just jumping up and accessing that infrastructure because he's just been there forever. And regardless of what his view is when whatever side of the bed he wakes up on, it's his primary, it's his party, and yeah.
What's crazy about that is, I think that a lot of folks gave Jill Stein some flack for not directly calling herself a socialist. Mr. Hawkins is calling himself a socialist, but he's sort of preaching a very Western European style of socialism, sort of Bernie Sanders style socialism, not anything nearly as radical as what Jill would call for. Because Jill, literally went to Russia and got, filleted for it in the mainstream media. She literally went to Korea and tried to work with a South Korean peace movement to say, no, we don't want war with North Korea. Yes, we know how bad the North Koreans are. We still don't want to fight them. We still don't want to drop a bomb on them. So, I give Jill a ton of credit for the anti-war work and anti-imperialist work she's done. And that's why you see mainstream media politicians such as Hillary Clinton saying the successor to Jill Stein in their crazy pro-Russiagate mind is Tulsi Gabbard, who is a Democratic candidate running for president, not Howie Hawkins. Because Howie Hawkins is I mean, you know, he sort of takes the exact same line as Bernie Sanders. He's like he's pro-Palestinian, but that's about the extent of his anti-imperialism work. You know, so this is really bizarre, and that's sort of very similar to Sanders. When people say Sanders is anti-imperialist, I say, not really. I mean, he's made some comments critical of Israel, and that's it. You know, like the end of list of things that I would call Sanders an anti-imperialist on. And Hawkins is quite similar. And I think that mainstream politicians see this. And I think we now have someone literally to the left of our own candidate, our own frontrunner candidate, certainly on foreign policy issues, who's running as a Democrat, who's running quite well as a Democrat, and that's Tulsi Gabbard. So this is just really bizarre times for us here in the Green Party, and I'd say in the Democratic Party too.
Yeah, it is. It is extremely bizarre, and I mean, with the anti-imperialist thing, that's the same in the UK. Jeremy Corbyn, whenever he wants to go anti-imperialist, he drums up his pro-Palestinian stuff, but that's about as far as he goes, because the UK, you know, they built a huge empire, and you know, but they only ever talk about Palestinians, and they talk about Israel a little bit, but they're kind of so divided on Israel because you know, they're there now and they shouldn't be there, Balfour Declaration, but Palestinians, so they're basically just trying to call for an armistice, really, and it's just like a peace process as far as I can see. But it's kind of a really doozy subject when there's actually a lot more issues. And from America, you can talk about that. The UK is probably out of that picture now, but from America, you can talk about Venezuela. You can talk about Korea. I mean, you're a Pacific-facing country and you're an Atlantic-facing country over there in the Middle East and Syria, you know, and the revolutions, like the democratic revolutions of 2011, the Arab Spring, you can talk about that. You have a lot more influence in America to talk about a lot of these more socialist ideas, right? Yeah, it's very interesting. Howie Hawkins, very interesting what's going on there. Tulsi Gabbard, let's talk about her. But first, before we talk about Tulsi, what do you think? Beto O'Rourke just dropped out of the race. He's just dropped out now, today or yesterday or something like that. Did you like Beto? Do you want to absorb Beto? Do you want to bring Beto in the Green Party? You know, what do you think of Beto O'Rourke?
Oh, that's pretty funny. I mean, Beto O'Rourke was, look, when I first read about him, he was apparently in like some kind of hackers collective called like the Dead Cow or something like that back in the day. And I was like, okay, maybe this guy's kind of cool. You know, I do tech, you know, I'm a techie, I'm a technologist and a nerd and all that stuff. So, you know, but his platform was just atrocious. Like it made no sense. He just seemed to take the most radical centrist position imaginable. You know, he just kind of touched every third rail for no reason. I mean, he never really had a plan. He just kind of said, like, he dropped the F-bomb a lot, you know, and then he told people he wanted to take their guns. And I mean, there was never like a written plan around that. It's not like he was actually serious. He just said it just to get clicks and likes and donations. And I felt like his campaign was a complete, you know, hollow mess. I'm frankly glad that he's out of the race. You know, it takes a lot of guts to run. It takes a lot of work and time. You know, I never want to speak badly of someone when they drop out. But I mean, his campaign was like just pathetic. I mean, I really couldn't stand it. He felt like he was just, you know, trying to get this cool guy image. You know, his Spanish was horrible. You know, all my Spanish speaking friends said so. You know, like he's you know, he got his nickname from like his like nanny used to call, you know, like his like au pair used to call him Beto, and he's just a phony. Like I couldn't stand that guy. I'm really glad he's out of the race. You know, I seriously appreciate him running. I think, but what you're seeing is a lot of centrist candidates or moderate candidates slowly drop off, because I think the race in the Democratic primary is way further to the left. Way further to the left. I think the candidates that have momentum are Tulsi Gabbard, Yang, and definitely Bernie. And I think Elizabeth Warren is sort of the new center for the Democratic primary. And that's why I think you're going to see Kamala Harris is going to go next. Cory Booker is going to go very soon. When they do, when mainstream media does stories that basically say things like campaign on life support, like candidates' last chance, what they're actually doing is they're giving candidates one more shot to make a comeback. That's what they're doing, you know? So, that's what they're doing right now to Kamala Harris. I think they've given Booker his one shot and he's done because they did that a couple of months ago. And now I think the next one to drop out, I think Biden's going to be in it probably until the primary, at least until Iowa. And then he'll probably drop out pretty soon after that. And, it's weird because it leaves an opening for Hillary to come in. And that would definitely add to the mess in the Democratic primary. But I think that might embolden the leftists to regain their strength and to keep donations up and keep that side of the party going.
I was going to say, what do you think about Biden? Because do you think he's the new center, and Elizabeth Warren, even for centrists or people on the right, she is pretty extreme. Like they would call her fairly extreme, right? I mean, she's pretty far left. I mean, do you think Biden's the new center? I mean, he's definitely a neocon.
So this is why I'm a revolutionary socialist, because I think the problems that could have been solved by reform socialists, the time for fixing them has changed, has passed. To be frank with you, I think that you're seeing climate change and spiraling inequality and warring nations kind of lead us to a new era of what needs to be a revolutionary socialist. Now, I think that reform socialists like Bernie Sanders are in a really tough spot, because I genuinely believe that the folks that are, reform socialists, like those folks, that love Bernie, are going to support his campaign no matter what. But I do think that reform capitalists, or like a FDR style capitalist such as Warren, almost like a Roosevelt style in both Roosevelt sense. Like she's kind of a trust buster in what she's kind of saying out there. And I think that really hits the ear to a lot of folks that are saying, well, that's what I want. I don't know if I want socialism. I'm not sure what socialism is. I know it's something on the left, but I know that if I vote Warren, she's going to bust up the banks, or she's going to bust up Facebook. She's going to bust up Amazon. That's something that I could get behind. I think that that's why Bernie is. I think the mainstream media has done a great job of trying to paint every Bernie supporter as a possible Warren supporter, which is ridiculous. I think if you're truly a socialist, you're probably not going to go with Warren. But I also think that for those that are confused, the mainstream media has done an excellent job of making an argument for Warren over Bernie to those that are, choosing between those two candidates. And I think that right there is why, reform socialism has sort of seen its day come and go. I think there is going to be a lot of confusion between the Warren camp and the Bernie camp until Bernie is able to really bust out his message of why his version of socialism is different than Warren's version of reforming capitalism. That to me is what I'm waiting for. And I'm reading Bernie's policies, and I'm very impressed. He's one of the few candidates that actually talked about increasing public housing. That's usually something that Democrats won't even touch. And formerly Democrats like Barack Obama have done everything they can to torch public housing and give it over to privatized developers. So for Bernie to do that I give him a lot of kudos. But us in the revolutionary socialist world would just say, there's a very clear difference between what I believe in and what Elizabeth Warren believes in. I think it's just a little harder for someone like Bernie Sanders.
What period of time would have reform socialist work? I mean, did Obama steal the moment? I mean, was it after George Bush? Was that when time was ripe, or when was it ever ripe? Why is it more important now? Why is revolutionary socialism? Why are you saying that's the next step as opposed to reform? Why can't reform work?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think a lot of stuff in U.S. politics, I can't speak as much internationally, but I think a lot of stuff in U.S. politics are reactionary. So I think you saw quite a steady movement in the 80s and 90s, even before that in the 60s and 70s around climate catastrophe, warning about nuclear weapons, warning about international war. So I think, but the result of some of that was sort of a neoliberal world order, that I think the Clinton administration definitely typified. Was the quintessential kind of neoliberal
Right.
world order view. And on top of that, the Obama administration really doubled down. I mean, it's an embarrassment how far backwards the Obama administration took us in terms of things like international policies and even civil liberties. I mean, Obama literally drone striked a U.S. citizen abroad and gave no legal justification for it, other than, I guess this person has given up their citizenship because I now deem them a terrorist. I mean, that is a massive step backwards. The Obama administration was also the one to do the bank bailout. So, I mean, you've got really ridiculous policies that I think folks are now kind of waking up. Even Andrew Yang, who is the most capitalist revolutionary I've ever seen, and I've asked him this personally, what does that mean? And I've still never gotten a clear answer, but maybe one day I will, has, clearly said that to bail out the banks over individuals who are literally losing their homes and still lost their homes was an insanely stupid policy that should have never have happened. So, I think that style of propping up large institutions just because we want to keep the capitalist system afloat is done. And so I think that you're going to need a presidential candidate that is going to be very acutely aware of this and be interested in doing new and exciting and unique revolutionary economic programs. So, I mean, literally, I'm talking about stuff that my campaign was talking about, and you can still see it if you go to Schlakman.com. It's all right there still. Was literally a human rights-based economy. So not an economy where we measure by GDP or growth per capita or any kind of those BS indexes. Literally an economy where we say, okay, what do we need to make sure every single person in the U.S. has enough to eat, drink, live, like survive their life, actually thrive, that kind of thing. Food, housing, shelter, clothes, that kind of stuff. Internet, communication, travel, all of this should be a human right. And the economy, the definition of an economy is the delivering of economic goods to individuals, right? So that should be the goal of the economy, is to make sure every single person, no matter how much money they have, no matter what kind of situation they're born into, no matter how much they're able to accumulate, capital-wise, is able to have all those things they need to survive. And then my campaign kind of took it a step further and actually said, well, why not you make sure that actually you can innovate as well? So we were calling for an innovation economy as well. Because as we know, the current capitalist state we have right now, Google or large companies will buy smaller companies just to kill their competing products. I mean, this has been going on for decades. You saw this with the electric car here in the U.S., killed by GM very early on, because they didn't want to compete with their fossil, fueling gas guzzlers. So it's not enough to just say, we're going to slowly reform capitalism by tricking it into killing itself. Like, that's not really enough. You need to literally say, capitalism is the problem. It's destroying people's lives. It's destroying the planet. We should own this stuff. Like, if Boeing messes up and keeps creating airplanes that are killing folks because they're not training people and not selling the right simulators and all this other stuff with this 737 MAX situation. I don't know if your audience is familiar with that. Like Kashama Sawant, I believe she's a revolutionary socialist, said in Seattle, we should take over the Boeing plant. Like, the workers should literally take over the Boeing plant, and then the government and workers can own it in a cooperative structure, and we can decide what we want to build. Maybe we want to build more trains. Maybe we want to have better train infrastructure here in the U.S. Maybe we need better airplanes that are safer. We could just build that. Like we shouldn't just be waiting for capitalists to come reopen factories as they close. Workers should literally take those factories over, open them up again, spring the doors open, and say we're ready to produce for what people need in our community. Right here in Baltimore, Maryland, where I live, we have literally crumbling infrastructure, gigantic sinkholes, they call them all the time. They're not sinkholes. They're literally our ancient infrastructure of wooden pipes, literally wooden conduit beneath our city streets is collapsing. And, rather than say, let's train some local young people who are desperate for work to literally get under the city and give them a good job and, help them, help us repair our ancient infrastructure, it's always a question of, well, who can bid us for the cheapest, from an out-of-state company, maybe an international company that doesn't really care about us over here, and, they have the capital to invest in us and we'll have to pay them back forever. I mean, it's just a backwards way of doing things, and you have to actually get to the root of the problem. You can't just tackle this by saying, let's go back to like an FDR-style policy, which I think now the Democrats are championing because it's an easy win for them. You need something more revolutionary.
Yeah, look, you're preaching to the choir on this show. I don't agree with everything you said, and I would call myself a capitalist, but for the most part, I do have sympathy with Elizabeth Warren on breaking up the banks. I do have sympathy with the United States in this, and I call it not capitalism, but I call it empirism, because I see it as an expansion, and this is why I know about Abby Martin, and I know about these ideas, and I do listen to these ideas because I see it as a problem of cronyism and empirism as opposed to a socialist utopian idea. But like it's more complicated than that, and I know, and it's not. It's just that I can see from an entrepreneurial perspective. Efficiencies in capitalism that can fix this. But where I see the problem is where the state's getting in the road and the cronyists. So the state, it's almost fascism, right? It's the state and corporate powers working together in cahoots, and then they're locking out of actually locking people and products and innovations out of the system. You mentioned the electric car. You mentioned big mega banks who you have tons of houses. They're all foreclosed, but people can't sleep in them. I mean, it's just a huge, and you have a huge homeless crisis. I mean, there has to be more humanity embedded into the system. It's a big problem, and I call it empirism as opposed to capitalism, because I think capitalism is more the exchange of goods and services rather than a system of hierarchy, if you know what I mean. Because I see it from the socialist perspective where and I agree, GDP's got to go. I agree with you on these metrics ideas as well. GDP's got to go. It's a silly idea. You've got to have more indexes. You've got to have a multitude of indexes melded into a single index that includes human health, the environment, social well-being, infrastructure, access to water, food, shelter, a free and open internet, as opposed to this new, what are they calling it now? Neo-colonial internet, which is what they're expanding across India and all this, where you can only open it up and you can only see Facebook and you can only see YouTube. You need to have a free and open internet as opposed. Sure, I mean, if all you can do is open it up and see T-Series and PewDiePie, I mean, is that really a good internet? I mean, that's not a good internet, right? That's censorship. And I'm really, really, really super impressed that, that you see and you talk about the failings of the Obama administration as well, because I have the same problems. I have the same issues, the bailing out of the banks, the drone strikes. It was abhorrent. But this goes back. I mean, this is an elitist problem. George Bush, the surveillance state, Patriot Act, foreign wars, this Iraq 1 and 2, the Gulf War. This is a long process of corruption at the very, very top, and I'm glad that you can see that there's problems there, and those problems are entrenched and they're really hard to get rid of. But I've always commented them on the fact that it's empire. It's a angry empire, and that's
Well,
where it is as opposed to its capitalism.
Well, us here in the U.S., I think that that's something that I must give Tulsi Gabbard some credit for because, she literally kind of said, in the last debate that the number one thing you do when you're the president here in the U.S. is you are the commander in chief of what's easily like 10 times over the world's largest military. So I give her a lot of respect and credit because I don't think that you could be seriously running for the presidential spot and not recognize that. And what is irritating to me is that I think these so-called, soft left candidates or, not necessarily anti-imperialist socialist, like I would classify Mr. Hawkins as and like I classify Bernie Sanders as, don't really understand that. If they get into office and they continue to champion empire and champion U.S. intervention, that creates an enormous problem because China wants to be the other international global superpower. And they kind of have rights to say that they are bigger than the U.S. in some equations. The top 10 largest banks are all Chinese banks. I mean, they've kind of literally went from a communist country to a capitalist country at the U.S.'s insistence, by the way. And now
Reagan landed there on a plane and opened the door. Remember, open door policy.
Literally. And, now we want to, so now they're saying we're bigger than you, we're better than you, we deserve your intellectual property, and you're going to play by our rules. We kind of told them to play by, we told them to play by our rules years ago. Like, that's sort of the way I see it. And I see Russia as doing the exact same thing as well. All of these other, what may be called minor superpowers, I would call them equal international superpowers, are just going to emulate what the U.S. has done. I see the same thing with the Chinese Uyghurs. Everyone's making such a big deal about these poor, folks that are being put in these detention camps. But I think that China is saying, well, if you look at what we do to the if you look at what the U.S. did to the Native Americans, which is literally genocide, hey, us putting them through a re-education camp and making sure they can't practice religion anymore is probably a lot less bad. So I really think that what's happening here is we need a complete realignment of international diplomacy. And one of the first things I would do if I was president, and this is something that I've been trying to champion and make sure the Green Party champions, is that day one, I would sit down with Russia and China and say, look, we have the biggest military, bar none. We will commit to rolling back our military spending by X% if you agree to not have your military increase in spending, or if you roll back your military spending, or even better, we'll commit $100 billion, which is only 1/6 of the U.S. documented military budget. It's actually a lot higher than that. If you all commit another $100 billion, or come up with the money yourselves or through your partner countries, and then with $200 billion, we could literally end world hunger. We could literally end world poverty. We literally solving international problems in a new, a cooperative world where we actually work with other superpowers to end some of the biggest problems facing our population as a planet, not just trying to compete with them and shove them back down. When I was in Michigan, I was giving a talk there to some folks that are in the United Workers, the car union over there, the auto workers union, right before they struck. And they said, one of the things I said to them, and they got it, was, Forbes magazine over here is saying, oh, we have a big problem in the U.S. We're no longer the number one superpower in Asia. And it's like, why does the U.S. need to be the number one superpower in Asia? We're not in Asia. We're in North America. So it's completely insane that we have this kind of attitude that we have to be the biggest player in the world, everywhere in the world, from Antarctica to the North Pole. And that is going away. We need to completely undo that mentality and that philosophy, because not only can we not afford it, we literally can't afford it. Our people are starving right here in the U.S. We just don't keep track of the number of people that die due to poverty. But we also are killing the planet. The U.S. military is the number one organizational offender of pollution and CO2 emissions in the planet. So, I mean, I think that you're just opening the door for Russia, China, and now India. You look at India with an enormous military, an enormous amount of population. They literally taken over Kashmir. Why? Because they can, and they see other large countries doing whatever they want as well. Why can't every single regional superpower just do whatever they want? The U.S. does whatever we want, and so this has to stop. We need to all come together in some sort of, we need to use the UN or another clearly democratic international body.
That was my next question. What do you think of the
Go
UN?
So I think the UN is a deeply flawed organization as it currently exists. But I also feel that the UN is one of the only international democratic bodies that we currently have that has any real chance of making a real difference. I mean, everyone's so critical of the UN because oftentimes they don't allow for interventionist positions because Russia or China will veto something. But in reality, that's what we want. We want an organization where the U.S. is not above or bigger than every other country on the planet. We want a truly international body that people feel like the U.S. is not just bullying around. Right now, the U.S. is literally spying on international embassies, including the UN, and that's part of my platform as well to end that practice. Our Five Eyes initiative, which we really take the leadership role on, clearly shows that we want international dominance when it comes to spying, and we think we're entitled to it. How long can we keep that up? I mean, Russia and China are not going to allow us to be the only international player in the spy game like that. They're going to want to extend their influence and control. So the only way to really combat this, in my opinion, is to just kind of have a realigning, and I think it starts at the UN. I think the UN could be seen as a truly international organization as long as it's truly democratic and truly every country gets a say. I think it could really be the next organization to take that leadership role, because I think that you are going to see hotspots like genocide is going to happen, like what Turkey is doing to literally pushing people out of their homes in northern Syria is an immense problem. But the problem is we don't really have a truly international body that we could say, let's rush peacekeepers into it. I think the UN sorta has that role right now, But I think even the U.S. is sort of undercutting the UN's power.
Well, I've always argued that the UN is just an arm of U.S. diplomacy, and that everybody kind of gets a say or whatever, but they get a say in the context of the Security Council, which is it's kind of an old institution now. I mean, there's five people. I mean, the UK is no longer really a big player. France, arguably. Right. U.S., China, Russia, but those are the guys who get to say, and it really comes down to the Security Council, not the United Nations. And so anyone can, jibber jabber at the UN all they want, but it's all done within the context of what the U.S. wants. And the way that Trump's got around, it's very sneaky. It's incredibly well played. The way that Trump's got around all of these, international organizations, from the United Nations, Interpol, to UNESCO, to whoever, Amnesty International, whoever, is he's just simply said America first, and he's cut funding. And all of a sudden, he's squeezed them dry, yes. And now they're begging. And so when there's geopolitical stuff that happens, the UN is zipped because they want money, they want cash, and if America doesn't give them cash, they don't do anything. So you've seen the UN be uniquely quiet on Syria, and it's like, why? And it's like, hang on, because Trump won't give them money, and that's how you play the UN nowadays. So yeah, it's an arm it's an arm, and then Asia's fighting back with the Development Bank, basically in the with BRICS and the Development Bank, and with other international organizations. But yeah, I've just always seen the United Nations as an arm of U.S. diplomacy, simply because it's never really been a truly fair outcome, judicial outcome. They've always leaned on one side or the other, and they don't really stand up for Julian Assange. They don't really stand up for whistleblowers. They don't really stand up for. They just stomp around in sort of marginal areas of the globe and say, "Look what we've achieved." But It's never really. It's a talking forum, and yes, it's a fair forum. I mean, everyone gets a say, and everyone gets to chair the chair, and they get to talk about climate change till the cows come home or whatever. But it's never really actually stood up on real issues. It's never had that sort of gusto, because then once you find out who's funding it, it's because when America gets cranky, it just pulls out that funding mechanism, and suddenly the UN's revealed for what it is, a toothless tiger, right?
Yeah, no, actually, I'd be remiss if I didn't was clear about this. One of the things that really got me into this race was because I firmly support Julian Assange being released. I firmly support the other whistleblowers as well, Chelsea Manning, Jeremy Hammond, and Reality Winner also being released from prison as well. And I think that some other folks, including the folks that I've mentioned in the Green Party already, don't really feel that way. Particularly, Mr. Hawkins has been quite silent about this, which is atrocious and terrible. But there you have it. Anyway, I mean, but let me get back to this question about the UN for a moment, because I think I've been pestering the Democrats to reconsider the way they're doing the impeachment of Trump, because what they're doing with the impeachment of Trump is they're trying to get him on these international, in these U.S. technicalities, rather than prosecute him based on international law. What he's doing to the migrants at the U.S. border is clearly against international law. You saw this recently with the I'm going to get this wrong. The Sea-Watch ship captain who refused Italy's orders to release migrants fleeing from Syria, I believe, to Italy. I think
the billionaire. Yeah.
Are you talking about the female sea captain there that we're talking about?
Yeah. Sea-Watch or something. Yeah.
I can't remember her name. I'm sorry. But anyway, one of the things she clearly quoted was the international law of the sea, and the UN clearly have rules that say what to do with stateless people. And clearly international refugees are stateless people. So, I mean, clear as day, these folks need to be given treated fairly under international law. But what the U.S. refuses to do, Democrat and Republican, is to ever recognize international law. We don't want to ever actually recognize folks that are coming here from all different sort of South American countries as international refugees that deserve treatment under international law. And the treatment literally says that they are to be given asylum and shelter and food and treated well. And they're not. I mean, they're clear as day dying in the what I would call concentration camps on the border with Mexico. I mean, literally, you have kids that are dying of easily curable diseases like measles or infections. So obviously, they're not being given antibiotics or basic vaccinations. So, if we were to, that's why it's so important that the U.S. has to be the one to take the lead, because literally, what do we do with these U.S. military bases? I mean, let's say, let's take any military base in the Middle East. If we were to just have a president that actually said, we're out, we're pulling out our troops, we're pulling out our infrastructure. Okay, great. You pull out U.S. troops, and you'd pull out maybe our mobile vehicles like tanks or planes or drones and that kind of thing. Then what do you do with the military bases? They're still sitting there. You have to give them to someone. So, if you give them away to like the Assad regime, that's crazy. Like, no one's ever going to do that. So I think the only real option for the U.S. is to stop hamstringing the UN and literally hand over some infrastructure to it, not just funds, but actually hand over military installations to the UN, and then have the UN actually decide what kind of international peacekeeping force, with us just being one voting member out of many, is going to then occupy all of our international military bases. I mean, because otherwise you're in for a weird situation where China and Russia are just going to keep trying to build on top of what we're building, and you're never really going to see the end of that. The only way to end this kind of stalemate, in my opinion, is to literally hand those off to a neutral third party, and the only one I could think of would be the UN.
You know, it's not as crazy as it sounds because I always talk about the collapse of Bretton Woods, right? And the collapse because Bretton Woods is now this half-century plus old infrastructure, global infrastructure that's protected
Right.
the world. You know, the first half of the 20th century was a genocidal, crazy mess. I mean, you had World War One, which opened up the century. Then you had a peace ceasefire, and then you had World War Two, which was nuts. I mean, with ending on a crescendo with two atomic bombs. You know, two cities absolutely devastated. In the middle of that, you had you had the Spanish flu. You had all this sort of stuff, and then out of that, you had the collapse of empire, which went to a whole lot of new issues. You know, collapse of the European empire. So you had decolonization, but the only good thing to come out of that was Bretton Woods system, and the Bretton Woods system was this sort of global glue that has sort of liberal socialist economic policies typified by rightly what you said, the Clintons actually with the World Trade Organization and their promotion of that liberal trade idea and breathing life into China. It has kept the world away from that. I mean, we're in 2019 now, heading into 2020. Just a few years ago was 2014. That should have been World War One. I mean, that would have been devastating. We should have had nuclear strikes in the 80s, like you were saying. The proliferation of nuclear weapons is being kept at bay. We've had denuclear. There are positives, right? But with the collapse of Bretton Woods, you're going to see that these small countries, and we talk about it here all the time on this show, with a Ron Paulian type or a revolutionary type disengagement from the Middle East or other areas. You mentioned, for example, Asia. Why do we need to be the most powerful player in Asia? Well, because by being a powerful player, you can enforce peace between Japan and China and South Korea and North Korea and Taiwan and China and Vietnam and China and the Philippines and some random country and China and Australia and China and India, because China is certainly at the center, right? So by America doing that, it's enforced this sort of global peace. And if you do take those troops out rapidly, or those aircraft carriers, or whatever, you are going to see a splitting up, and these tiny little countries you never heard of, they are going to start wanting to vie for power again because now they have the power. Now, if you do give it over to some sort of international body, say the United Nations, which is a peace enforcement strategy, it's not as stupid as it sounds. I'm just saying, it's not as stupid as it sounds.
No, I appreciate that, and this is a really interesting argument that I had with a Trump supporter who had me on his show, who he was really into this idea of global isolationism, and I sort of made the argument that you can't put the globalist genie back in the bottle. I don't think we could just say, let's just undo the internet or undo mass communication or limit international travel to the point of extreme oppressiveness. I just don't think that's realistic. I think the realistic next thing to do is the Pax Americana has to end, and who's going to enforce the peace? So we've got to look. That's why I'm not so critical of some of the more interesting and unique arguments out there for what to do next on the from a leftist standpoint. I'm critical of those that just want to think that America could just stay in this position forever. I mean, literally, Trump, I feel he's a little bit more of an isolationist. I'll give him that, but he's definitely more of a American exceptionalist type and a peace by strength person. There has been so much of an effort to keep the space a demilitarized and weapons-free zone, and Trump has just sort of obliterated that publicly, even though previous administrations have all been obliterating that behind the scenes, just quietly. And so now you have France having to do crazy things like saying, Well, we have to develop space weapons because we have to protect our satellites. I mean, it's just a complete breakdown of the international order, and it's got to go somewhere. And that's why I am a revolutionary socialist, because I truly believe that we could have a better economic system that could lead to not only international peace, but also literally uplifting every single person in this planet by ending poverty and making sure we all have an innovative system to have access to the floor or access to economic rights.
Let's talk about the USTP, because we've got, the USTP is an interesting party. We offer a lot of solutions to a lot of these problems. Are you familiar with the USTP?
So here's how I'm familiar with USTP. I followed Zoltan Istvan, quite a bit. And then I realized you guys were having a primary, and I looked into your primary, and it seemed like a great process. That's the extent of my knowledge of USTP, though, I'll admit.
All right, cool. Well, the USTP core ideals: one, the Transhumanist Party supports significant life extension achieved through progress of science and technology, which you might be interested in. Ideal 2, the Transhumanist Party supports cultural, societal, and political atmosphere informed and animated by reason, science, and secular values, so secular values. And Ideal 3, the Transhumanist Party supports the use of science, technology, rational discourse to reduce and eliminate various existential risks to the human species. So it's a human-centered party. And they embrace people from all over the spectrum. I mean, I went for Trump in 2016, but I'm part of the USDP, and we've got people who went for Bernie Sanders and still do go for Bernie Sanders. For example, we're very excited because Ben Zion 2020 got to talk to Andrew Yang, who actually is my favorite candidate. Right now, another guy who works with me. His favorite candidate is Tulsi Gabbard, but I'm on Team Andrew Yang in that field. But I went for Trump because was better for me than Hillary, if you know what I mean, in that dichotomy, right? But
yeah, I know exactly what you mean. Let me just say, I really appreciate USTP having that on their platform. The kind of existential threats to the planet, because that's another reason that I'm really for this notion of a new international engagement. One of the metaphors that I use all the time, and I'm so glad USTP is interested in this, is if an asteroid was about to hit the planet the next day, no one would be, in a month or two, no one would be, anyone that would dare talk about the cost of this would just be a complete moron. The price of avoiding an apocalyptic asteroid impact would obviously not be relevant. You have to spend all of humanity's resources, and that's going to mean working with countries that you may not like and putting your differences aside, because that's what you do when you're one species on one planet. So, that's truly why I that's one of the foundational reasons that I believe in this realignment has to happen. And I'm so glad to see the Transhumanist Party talking about that publicly. It's so important. One more thing, if I could. The other part of this is that so many of these new technologies are not going to be available to the average person in the U.S. and definitely not to the poor. So, that's why it's so important to me to have a party that's speaking about that publicly. And, I was hoping to make that the Green Party, but I'm glad that the Transhumanist Party is talking about this.
Yeah, we're always talking about this, and we think we can get these sort of socialized solutions to get these technologies into the hands of the poor. I mean, just the way that mobile phones have with advanced computer technology have got their hands into the poor. This is why we talk about digital rights. There has to be security rights, but you also have to have access to the internet and have to have access to information and knowledge, right? You have to have access to clean water, to sanitation, you have to have these sorts of things. Lots of people in the USDP support a UBI. Lots of people don't support a UBI. But I think most do in general support a UBI because advancing automation, which they see automation as a good thing, because it frees up time, it's more efficient, but we have to rethink work. That's what you really have to start to rethink the definition of work when you talk about a UBI and automation, right?
Yeah. Well, we're there. I mean, we're there. We have to rethink the definition of work right now, because if work means getting into your car and polluting the environment and then standing in a crappy fast food restaurant where you're serving poison to people and slowly killing yourself, that's not a good definition of work. It doesn't help the planet, doesn't help people, doesn't help your community. If your definition of work is to plant trees and prevent climate catastrophe, that's a better definition of work. And by the way, I'm all for a basic income guarantee. I know a lot of the folks who are working on Yang's team, specifically because I've given conferences and talked to those same folks, the basic income guarantee folks. I work with those folks internationally, and I'm sort of the socialist on the panel, when we do these talks and lectures, because I don't believe in getting rid of some of the other current welfare programs, and there's so few in the U.S., like Andrew's kind of calling for. I understand why he's doing it, but I don't really think that's the way to go. But I'm certainly a big supporter of a basic income, and I am glad that Yang is bringing it front and center.
Yeah, see, so like I lean on the libertarian spectrum because I like freedom from government. I think people should have the ability to do things and have certain freedoms, morphological freedom, of course, this ability to, but at the same time, the thing I do like about the working, because this is the conversations you can't really have with the libertarian people. You can't really, like I agree with Jesse Ventura, you can't really talk about climate change because it's collectivist, and because apart from recycling, which is what they always talk about. They always talk about localized solutions to global problems. It doesn't make sense. Like, it doesn't actually make sense. Like, these are collective, species-wide problems. Other things you can't talk to them about is you can't really talk to them about international thinking, because either they go, oh, it's everybody's individual responsibility, or it's your own country and you should have isolated policies. The thing I do like about the socialists and people like yourself is they're constantly thinking on a species-wide level, whether or not they agree with that. It's that Karl Marxian sort of working, you're all in it together, sort of, workers unite sort of thing. And so when you talk to people like yourself, suddenly we're talking about Venezuela, and we're talking about Russia, and we're talking about China, and we're talking about India, all in the same sentence. And I do like this. I do like this sort of rhetoric a lot, because I do see that there are, despite what people think, there is a lot of backroom government chatter where countries actually do a lot of cooperating and work on a lot of issues. It's the things that don't work out that make the media headlines all the time. When people say, oh, the governments are never doing any work together, they never work together, they never do anything. The only thing they ever hear is what is consumable, and what is consumable is the bad stuff, the stuff that goes wrong. The one, I mean, if you think about the TPP, right? Like, for example, I mean, so many countries actually made that work, and then once the United States left, all they concentrated is on the United States not working, as opposed to the fact that 9 or 10 countries actually did something really good, for example, or whatever. Like, they only concentrate on the negatives of that, and countries and cooperative units, cooperative bodies, internationalist bodies do a lot of work behind the scenes, and this is something that needs to be highlighted. But it's really hard because nobody's interested in that story. Everybody wants the sex scandal, So yeah, it is kind of, but it is good in that way. Talking to people on that side of the spectrum, because there's a lot of conversations you can't have. And then, you can talk about peace through strength with conservatives, and arguably that's okay. And arguably, if you have a global hegemon like the United States, that's an argument. But the thing about liberalism and liberal trade and stuff like that is you do breed up other countries that then can challenge in regional areas, China being the one, India being another, Russia being another. And so then that argument can only last as long. Technological change also levels the battlefield, levels the playing field, to the point where individuals are really, really powerful. Julian Assange or whoever. These whistleblowers are feared by whole nation states because they can do a media dump of the truth. And I don't understand the harassment. This is a thing in conservative circles, is you got some neocons who say, oh, absolutely need to protect the state from these whistleblowers because, it's embarrassing to the state, or it's state secrets or whatever. The left has the same sort of people, but at the same time, then you have these sort of libertarians who say, no, it's great. I mean, we need to protect them, but we can't do anything about protecting them because that's their individual. It's just
a little, yeah.
But anyway, look, the USTP, we try and rise above that and try and move above that and talk above above and beyond these issues. And so, because we talk about space all the time, and I like the fact that you bring up space because, yeah, Space Force, absolutely, it's militarizing space, which is a disappointment because it was on track to being a demilitarized zone, and there are so many powerful laser technologies and surveillance technologies and GPS tracking and missile guided techs and stuff like that that can easily turn this whole planet into a prison planet. And we're trying to avoid that, and especially if there's an arms race in space, you can end up with so much space junk that we might not even be able to get off the planet. I mean, the ISS was a fantastic cooperative effort between all these advanced countries, which have made something so marvelous for space science and space research and space cooperation between countries. And and it's just all been set aside now space has just been turned into a commercialized dump yard of some sort of new neo-modern race, right? And that's disappointing.
It's such a I should probably end it on this, but it's such an embarrassment because the U.S. was a world leader in a government-run space agency with plenty of business partners, almost far too many, I would say, helping craft our preeminent spacecraft. And then it just switched under the Obama administration and now under the Trump administration to a completely private model. I mean, sure, that's going to allow for innovation to hit faster. This is how I feel about it. I'm really excited about Elon Musk's Starlink. I think that I travel the country, and wherever I go, I would love to have the exact same internet, super fast, accessible from anywhere in the world. Sounds amazing. But I'm also deeply disturbed about thousands of low orbit satellites sort of unregulated drifting out there. I mean, or very quickly regulated by the Trump administration, and not a lot of international cooperation on this. I mean, we don't really have the proper facilities in our current government, at least here in the U.S., to actually talk about how quickly technology like AI or designer genes and designer life, and life hacking and stuff. We just don't have the technology at all. You see Congress people. I listen to a lot of C-SPAN here in the U.S. and it's a live feed of U.S. Congress. Yeah, I mean, you don't have any kind of facility to, you see Congress people kind of like scratching their head, like, what's this, the tubes of the internet now? What's this, a designer gene, you say? What does that look like? How does that work? Meanwhile, farmers are being put out of business, Monsanto Bayer's running amok, now being sued for causing cancer and all kinds of stuff. I mean, this is stuff that if you want government regulation, we should have good government regulation. And so I kind of, it's hard for me to talk to libertarians sometimes because obviously I don't agree with that view. But when the government is so incredibly inept and not doing their job, their basic job, and then, environmental destruction or farmers are put out of business or, AI software is running amok. I mean, you had that micro flash on the stock market just a couple years ago caused by malfunctioning AI. I mean, that kind of stuff could happen to the power grid. It could happen to internet services. I mean, none of this stuff is regulated, and it's all just being reactionarily adjusted one way or another. And there's no real, we have ethicists in this country. We have people that have thought about this and they've written books and papers about this that could be, actually weighing in on this and giving some decent ideas for legislation. But we just don't. We're so reactionary. Like you said, we're so focused on the sex scandal or on impeachment or on some other nonsense. And, we're never actually doing the work that needs to be done to create a society that works for everyone and that isn't doomed. Not to sound too doomsday there, but that's what I really think.
No, it's good, and thank you so much for coming on the show. I think this is great, and yes, send me other people who want to talk about this Greens Party scandal because I think it's great. It's very interesting because you guys have what we do in this show is like it's like everything is sort of spiraling. Like at the end of history, everything is sort of spiraling to the same sort of conversations. Like we can all sort of line up now because we're all running headfirst into this new technological era. are. And
Yeah.
whether you come from the left or the right, it's becoming a devoid. That spectrum of thinking is also becoming irrelevant, because we're heading into this as a species, and it's species problems. China, Russia, all these different countries. It's sort of not making sense in the fact that we're all having collective issues, and there are solutions and there are ways to do it. But I think we need to go up and beyond and over in the way that we talk and tackle these problems. Hey, thank you so much for coming on. Heaps
agree. Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. I very much appreciate it. If anyone wants to check out my website, it's still active. You could check. We actually have it's still active, so anyone can still contribute to it. A crowdsourced platform, so you could literally add your own topic, and we'll weigh in on it. We can thumbs up it, thumbs down it. That kind of stuff is happening right now. It's still going on. I don't intend to abandon the platform. We do have some next steps in mind. That aren't necessarily running for president, but they are something big and important. And I also want to give a shout out to Chad, also still running for Green Party presidential candidate, for setting up this interview. So appreciate that. Appreciate you having me on.
And good luck to Chad. Hopefully he goes really well. It sounds like you guys got a hard end of the stick, and that's unfortunate, but that's dirty politics, I guess.
Yeah, it's unfortunate to see a party mature and become as bad as other parties that are already mature. But, it's a lesson for other small parties out there, I think, that are growing up as well. So hopefully they won't repeat the same mistake.
That's what we're trying to learn here at the USTP. We're trying to stay away from all this mess, and we're trying to go up and over and beyond and be more fair, and hopefully we can actually sort out some of these existential issues without this nasty politics stuff. But anyway, thank you so much, Ian. You've been a fantastic guest. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Take care now.
All right.